So I am Alicia Olguin with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground Program in the Southwest region of Nebraska. The Common Ground Program covers conservation issues, and we help protect Nebraska's natural legacy. Today we have Keep Lexington Beautiful with us to talk about composting and waste reduction. We partner with Keep Lexington Beautiful in a variety of ways, and they're a great resource for the people in the Lexington area. Also, at the end of the webinar, there will be a survey that is linked. Please take the time to complete the survey. It is helpful for us to continue to bring you programming, and also let us know if you enjoyed the webinar. So I will send it over to Elvie with Keep Lexington Beautiful.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alicia, for the intro. I am Elvie Montes. I'm the director for Keep Lexington Beautiful. I've been in this position for almost a year, fairly new. So today, happy to have everyone here and learn a little bit. Hopefully everyone can take a little bit of the information we give you with you. So we'll start with our slide, our presentation. We'll have food waste, commercial, individual waste, and also we'll have some food waste resources at the end. Composting. What is composting? Types of composting, what types works best for you, and the benefits of composting. Food waste. Food waste or food loss is food that is wasted, lost, or uneaten. The causes of food waste or loss are numerous and occur at the stages of producing, processing, retailing, and consuming. Global food loss and waste amount to between 1/3 and 1/2 of all food produced. Commercial and industrial food waste. Food waste accounts for 8% of global emissions, making it a significant contributor to climate change. Grocery stores are severely lacking when it comes to handling food waste. Out of the 10 largest grocery chains, not a single store receives an A rating. Walmart ranked the best for their sustainability efforts, and only one retailer reports their total volume of food waste. A little story, not that long ago, I went to one of our local stores here in Lexington, Plum Creek Market, and they try to show initiatives on trying to save food and not waste so much. They had a bunch of little, like 16-ounce packs of strawberries that were going bad, and there were still some in there that were pretty good. But they were not just tossing them into the garbage. They were actually just putting them there for people to take. And, you know, and you could, when I took one, I was able to get a few of them out, and they were still edible. They were still good. And half of it went to the garbage, which makes a significant amount, like, change to the world. Lack of awareness of basic nutrition adds to food waste among consumers. Many people believe it's better to buy fresh food than that often goes bad, when in reality, frozen food products often retain more nutrition. And also, there is a video I would like to show you, the trailer. It's Just Eat It. It's a very interesting video. It shows about a couple who takes 6 months to just eat food that is discarded, and the amount of food that they see. At the beginning, it's very hard, but at the end, they start realizing how much food is being wasted in households and stores and in companies and everything. It's enormous. And the sad thing is that all that food goes to the landfill instead of going to homes, where, especially with a lot of poverty, a lot of people that go without eating food for days, and that food could go to them instead. So we'll just watch that little video right now.
I started coming across these numbers about how much was being wasted. And I just thought, How is nobody talking about this? 40% of everything raised or grown is not, in fact, eaten.
If that much food is being wasted, how much of it is still good, and can we eat it?
Oh, we're trying to survive off food waste right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna hit the jackpot.
I'm starting to enjoy this.
Is that cold stuff? Can I buy those bananas?
Yeah, you want to buy the bananas?
Yeah. I'm not gonna ask for a deal. I'd rather just not draw attention to it.
Supermarkets tell you what diameter, length, curvature, all of those parameters have to be exactly right.
A whole fridge is full of stuff that needs to be eaten tomorrow.
This is not a lifestyle that I want to continue.
Well, neither do I. Let's stop.
I don't want to stop because we haven't proved anything yet.
Highs and lows to the project, you know? Highs and lows. There's a high point.
This is edible, but it's not edible to the supermarket. As a grower, that's heartbreaking. When you grow the fruit and you can't sell it, that bothers me.
Yeah, this is me every week.
You wouldn't want to know how much product we would dispose of.
Wasting food is not only widespread, but it's condoned.
The scale of the stuff that we've seen so far is pretty shocking, and I think we've only seen like the littlest bit.
I started coming across
a couple of things I'm sure you guys saw on there. Pretty sad to see. We usually go to the store and we try to find the best produce we can find, and the ones that don't have a dent on it, or just the perfect food, and we take it home. And I'm guilty of it too. I have bought some produce and I plan to make an amazing meal, and then it just sits there and it just rots in my fridge, and at the end of the day it just goes to the garbage. And we forget to think of the process. It's not just the food that's been wasted, it's also the process that it goes through, the land that it's grown in, the process of collecting all that food, and the transportation to get to the stores, and then all the money that's spent and everything. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and it's just sad to see what happens with that kind of food. So one individual household food waste. Households are responsible for the largest portion of all food waste. BreFed estimates that U.S. households waste 76 billion pounds of food per year. That's approximately 40 to 50% of food waste that happens at the level of the consumer. That's almost equivalent to a pound of food per person a day, to 225 to 260 pounds per person a year of food wasted every single year. One of the biggest contributors of household food waste, food spoilage. About 2/3 of food waste at home is due to food not being used before it goes bad. 50 food spoilage at home occurs due to improper storage, lack of visibility in refrigerators, partially used ingredients, and misjudged food needs. Over preparing, the remaining third of the household food waste is the result of people cooking or serving too much food. Cooking portions have increased over time, and large meals often include more food than we can finish. The Cornell Food and Brand Lab found that since 2006, serving sizes in the classic cookbook, The Joy of Cooking, have increased by 36%. In addition, people often forget to eat leftovers and end up throwing them away. I'm guilty of that too. My sister would always get on my case about eating my leftovers. I hate leftovers, and it's sad because all that food is just going to the garbage. Another factor, date label confusion. An estimated 80% of Americans prematurely discard food due to confusion over the meaning of date labels. Sell by date, best if used by, expires by, and or so forth. In reality, sell by and use by dates are not federally regulated and only serve as a manufacturer suggestion for peak quality. Research on date labeling from the UK suggests that standardizing food date labeling and clarifying it means the meaning of it is to the public that can reduce household food waste by as much as 20%. Overbuying, sales on unusual products and promotions that encourage impulse and bulk food purchases at retail stores often lead consumers to purchase items that do not fit into their regular meal plans and therefore spoil before they can be used. Poor planning. Without meal plans and shopping lists, consumers often make inaccurate estimates of what and how many ingredients they will use during the week. Planned restaurant meals or food delivery can also lead to food at home going bad before it can be used. And some resources that you can go to get a little bit more information is Just Eat It. You can watch the full video on Hulu or YouTube for free. And also there's Feed It Forward. It's a Canadian food waste store and restaurant. It's owned and founded by Jagger Gordon. He started that after seeing so much food that was being wasted in restaurants and stores and companies and everything. He started his Feed It Forward restaurant doing freezer meals for people. And then he started doing his store, which basically has food that is a little dented, food that will not be purchased by consumers at the stores or that stores feel that are not quality food for them to sell. He sells it at his store, and basically it's pay as you can and helps a lot of the community. Also, another one is Waste Free Kitchen Handbook, a guide to eating well and saving money by wasting less food. This handbook, packed with engaging checklists, simple recipes, practical strategies, and educational infographics, is the ultimate tool for reducing food waste and wasted, the story of food waste. It's filmmakers explore the reasons for this waste and look for ways to fix the problem. So there's some resources that you can go to and get a little bit more information, kind of learn more about what is out there, what can you do to change those kind of habits or make a little bit of a difference.
Thank you, Elvie. That was a really good intro to food waste. And that's where we come in with composting. So for composting, first off, we need to know what composting is. It is a mixture of various decaying organic substances such as dead leaves, and it's often used for fertilizer. So there's a couple different types of composting. There is the on-site composting, which would be, you can make a compost pile with on-site composting, and it is just piling like the food on top of each other, and you do still turn it. It's just easier for like a backyard. And then there is vermicomposting, which is worms. So vermicomposting uses red worms in bins to feed on food scraps, yard trimmings, and other organic matter. The worms break down the material into high quality compost. The worm bins are easy to construct and can even be bought. It usually takes up to 3 to 4 months to get usable worm castings. You can compost food scraps, paper, and yard trimmings in worm bins. These work well for apartments and small offices. You will need to prep bedding and keep worms alive with proper conditions and sufficient foods. The worms are very sensitive to climate, so no extreme or direct sunlight. And then 55 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature range for the worms. And then there's the windrow composting, which is the turn composting. It is good for large volumes, such as whole communities. It yields a large amount of compost. This type of compost is set up by forming organic waste into rows of long piles called windrows and aerating the piles periodically, either manually or mechanically. This works best in large tracts of land and in warm, arid climates. Though it can survive in the cold climate as well, even if the outer soil is cold, the core is going to keep the heat at even 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the last one we have on here is direct composting, which is when you dig a hole around 12 inches deep and put in your kitchen scraps, and then you mix browns in and cover the top of the hole with the removed soil. And this takes about a month to stew and turn into rich compost. There's no turning or moving the finished compost. The plant around gets the dose of nutrients, and there's no smell. This is probably the easiest way to compost, is if you have a garden, just to dig a hole and put your food scraps in there, put the browns, which would be like dead leaves, on top, and then put your soil back on, and you don't even have to worry about it. It just kind of takes care of itself. And then this last picture down here, the compost tumbler, would be for if you want to have a kind of mess-free compost, because it would be contained into the tumbler, and you just add your food scraps and then turn it when you add them. And then here's a little video on vermicomposting.
Together, we can push the boundaries of what's possible. Let's ignite innovative thinking. Diverse. Think of all the food made in the world each year. Hard to picture? Then imagine that you are all of humanity, and on a plate in front of you is the one lovely annual meal you make for yourself. You did all sorts of work putting that meal on your table. You must be eager to consume the fruits of your labor, and the vegetables and meats and waffles of your labor too, right? Well, oddly enough, a third of that meal ends up in the trash. A third of the food we eat globally. An estimated 1.3 billion tons ends up as waste. All the work we put into producing that food is wasted. And what's worse, it costs us. America alone spends an estimated $165 billion a year managing food waste. We're wasting food, energy, and money. Perhaps worst of all, we're wasting the chance to change, to make the system of food consumption more efficient. If you want to bring on that change, you should know about a humble yet diligent and ever so crucial ally, the worm. Worms convert organic waste and other compostable products into natural fertilizers. Up to 75% of what we put in the waste stream can become food and bedding material for vermicomposting. You can create a worm bin in your own home to see the composting process in action. First off, you need worms, and not your typical earthworms. You need red worms, Eisenia foetida, the species responsible for most vermicomposting in North America. These red wigglers are surface dwellers who don't burrow too deep. They're optimal feeders around room temperature, and they're well suited to converting organic waste into usable fertilizer. Now, your worms might be vermin, but they need a comfortable space to live and work. Some bedding material, either shredded paper or cardboard, some moisture, and of course, food. Namely, your leftovers, slightly decomposed table scraps. The worms break down food waste and other organic matter into castings, a fancy synonym for worm poop. Their excrement is absolutely teeming with microbes, which continue the decomposition process, making all those once wasted nutrients available again as fertilizer. The timeline for the whole process varies depending on the quantity of worms, the temperature, and how much waste is added to the bin. And there's another timeline to consider. In a healthy worm bin habitat, worm reproduction will occur when the wigglers become sexually mature, indicated by an elongation of the segments into a bulbous structure. 3-month-old wigglers can produce 2 to 3 semi-translucent yellow worm cocoons a week. You thought only moths and butterflies come out of cocoons? Well, we can't all be majestic. It takes around 11 weeks for new babies to hatch. When your bin seems to be full of living vermicelli noodles, it's time to share the bounty with your friends and start a vermicompost club. Or keep those worms to yourself and start a business. Vermicomposting isn't confined only to small worm bins. It's an emerging entrepreneurial enterprise. Large-scale facilities convert bulk organic waste and even manure into rich black castings called black gold. Its value as a soil additive is unparalleled, and it can help plants resist harmful pathogens. The lack of available land in urban environments, coupled with growing interest in smaller-scale farming, means there's a market for vermicomposting. Many communities use composting as part of zero-waste strategies, and they can sell their worm-eaten table scraps to local farms hungry for rich fertilizer. So instead of wasting money dumping wasted food in landfills, we can remake waste into an asset, putting it back into our food system to make it more sustainable. All with the help of the humble worm, the tiny organism that can help us change the way we look at food's place in our lives, and our place in the world, as long as we give the little guy a place at our table. Well, not an actual seat at the table. A bin in the shed is fine.
So, if you're wondering what kind of compost would work best for you, here's a little table based on what space you have available and what you're going to be composting, what would work best for you. So if you have no outdoor space and you're only composting kitchen scraps, a worm bin would be the best. It'd be the easiest to maintain. And then if you have some outdoor space and you're gonna, again, just do kitchen scraps, you can do just a worm bin or a compost tumbler. Or if you have some yard waste as well, a compost tumbler would work best. And then if you have yard space, you can do, and you're doing just kitchen scraps, an enclosed bin or also a compost tumbler would work as well. And then if you have some kitchen scraps and some yard waste, and the enclosed bin and compost tumbler would work. And then if you have lots of yard waste and kitchen scraps, an enclosed bin would work best. And then if you have a very large yard or acreage space, the enclosed bin or compost tumbler for just the kitchen scraps. If you have some yard waste or lots of yard waste, you can have multiple enclosed bins or one enclosed bin, or an open compost pile that you just turn periodically. So that would be kind of like the windrow composting. And then as far as the benefits of composting, composting improves soil health by regenerating poor soil and encouraging the production of beneficial microorganisms, which then break down organic matter to create humus. Composting enriches soil, helping it retain moisture and suppressing plant diseases and pests. And then composting reduces the need for chemical fertilizers, and composting reduces greenhouse gases by reducing the production of methane gas that's released when food waste goes to the landfill. And then lastly, I have another video about how compost helped a farm.
What if one of the biggest contributors to climate change could be turned into one of the most powerful solutions? This man was just trying to get rid of the weeds on his ranch when he stumbled upon a way to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. In 1998, John Wick and his wife moved from San Francisco to a ranch in Northern California. But right away, there were problems. Cows from a neighboring ranch were roaming freely and destroying his land.
So the first order of business was to get rid of the cows. Once we got rid of the cows, we thought we were done and that things would become easy for us.
It didn't work out that way. Once the cows were gone, the ground dried out and weeds invaded the land.
So I took it seriously, and we had 20 men come and we pulled every weed on the ranch. And it got worse. The next year, more weeds came. 10,000 weeds came where every one weed had been.
A rangeland ecologist told John he needed to bring back the cows to combat the weeds, but the cows had to be used in just the right way. The cattle had to be moved constantly from one plot of land to another. That's because if cows stay in one place too long, they eat everything on the ground and destroy the soil.
So the first year we brought in 250 cows and we moved them across the ranch, just the right amount for them and for the grass. And it worked.
By the next summer, the land had completely repaired itself. The grass had deep roots, and the soil was holding a ton of water. That's when the ecologist had a light bulb moment. What if the land was doing even more? What if all that healthy grass was helping to solve climate change by sucking CO2 out of the air and storing it safely underground? If it was, it would be a major climate breakthrough. John brought in more scientists to conduct soil tests on dozens of ranches in the area to find out.
And we found something that was very exciting. It was exciting even to the scientists. We found that where they had sprayed cow manure on top of the grass, those ranches actually had more carbon in the soil. Nobody expected that to happen.
Dairy farms were storing the most carbon in the soil. Those farms had been sprayed with large amounts of manure, but that manure had a big downside. Manure produces some of the most powerful greenhouse gases on Earth. So John wanted to find something that was as effective as manure, but wouldn't heat the planet.
So we decided to try putting compost on top of the ground to see if we could see the same thing happen.
A few months later, John checked to see if it had worked.
Where we had put compost, we had a significant amount of grass. It was 50% more grass, and it was beautiful.
More importantly, the soil was storing vast amounts of carbon. And over the next few years, John's one application of compost caused the land to store more and more carbon. In fact, it turned out that just one dusting of compost would increase that storage for decades to come.
We were really excited about the results that we saw on my ranch. But in order for this to be meaningful, we needed to go take it to other bigger ranches, which is what we did at Stemple Creek with Lauren.
When I first heard about applying compost to the land, I was kind of skeptical. Didn't really know that much about it, but figured it's a good opportunity to learn.
Spreading compost on his land produced such incredible results. Lauren now makes his own compost. His land has been transformed.
When we first started applying compost to the land, it felt really, really good to see. You could actually visually see the results. The grass was greener and deeper and more lush, and it created a lot more biodiversity in the soil and the plant life, and it just felt good. And you could actually look at it and say, man, we are really making a difference by using this practice and building soil this way. So the compost we're applying now is going to be sequestering carbon for the next 30 years, which is pretty epic that we can create that kind of change.
And we need that kind of change because agriculture is responsible for 1/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions, and that number is growing. That's why in 2008, John co-founded the Marin Carbon Project to spread the idea of carbon farming to as many ranches and farms as possible.
We can lower the temperature of the planet right now by increasing how healthy our soils are.
What started with John's determination to get rid of weeds is now a blueprint for a revolution in agriculture and a way for farmers to help solve climate change, not make it worse.
This version of agriculture actually is a climate solution.
But if John's vision is going to have a global impact, it needs to be adopted by farms and ranches everywhere, because it could be as powerful a solution as wind, solar, or EVs in meeting the biggest challenge of our time.
So that video showed how compost and application of compost can be applied to larger scale operations like farms and ranches. So that's going to be the end of the presentation, and we will go into making the 5-gallon compost bucket. But before we do that, if you have any comments or questions, we'll take those now, just about food waste and composting. And if you want to know about more events like this one, you can like the Conservation Nebraska Facebook page and the Keep Lexington Beautiful Nebraska on Facebook. And then to learn more about what the Southwest region is doing, you can join the group Conservation Nebraska Southwest Region on Facebook. And also just another reminder to take the survey at the end of the webinar. So our first question is from Jude Wright. Are there food waste materials that shouldn't be composted? So for materials that you don't want to compost, there's a couple. So that would be black walnut tree leaves or twigs, coal or charcoal ash, dairy products, disease or insect-ridden plants, fats, grease, lard, or oils. Those type of materials should be taken to a hazardous waste facility. And then you don't want to compost any meat or fish bones and scraps, no pet waste, or yard trimmings treated with chemical pesticides. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, I will go ahead and move into the composting bucket. So Karen asked, how do you chop up twigs and branches? So for the twigs and branches in the compost, you're just gonna wanna put them into, chop them into smaller pieces that will be easier to compost. And branches you might wanna put towards the middle of the pile. And but twigs you can kind of just mix in with everything else. Then Ruby said, is there free compost supplies, worm bins available in Lincoln? So for Lincoln, you guys have people in Lincoln that are AmeriCorps members as well, just like I am. And I can reach out to them and give you their information to see if they would be able to get supplies to you. Yeah. Kaylee said that also she thinks that meats and dairies can't be composted. Yes, you don't want to compost any meat or dairy products. So as far as, and Lisa asked, can you add onion or citrus waste to your compost pile? If you have a worm bin, you don't want to add onion or citrus. Those are pretty toxic to them. But in your other compost pile, you don't want to add too much citrus just for acidity of your compost. And onion, you can add onion to your regular composting. Eggshells are okay. They are considered a green. So yes, eggshells are okay. Just make sure you rinse them out before you put them in the compost. The temperature for worms are, double check, 55 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You can keep worms in the summer. I actually have worms right now. You just have to monitor them a little bit closer in the summer. And if you want to keep their temperature down in their bin, you can apply damp newspaper over them, and that will cool them down. And then Brenda asks, is there any place in Scottsbluff, Nebraska to get composting material? So we do have people in Scottsbluff, and I can see if they would be able to get composting material for you. I also have put a list, I will put a list of what you need for the composting. It's just, you need about 5 things, and I'll show you how we'll make it here in a minute for the composting bucket. Are bread scraps okay, like stale or moldy bread? You can put bread scraps in your compost. You just don't want to do like a lot of bread scraps, and slightly decomposed is okay. Near Fremont, Nebraska, there would be people that cover Fremont, Nebraska. I will put their information on here, and I will have them reach out to anybody that is interested in composting in those areas. Again, with Omaha, we do have people in Omaha, so I can reach out to them and give you guys their give them your guys' information and tell them that you're interested in composting.
Real quick, Elisa, I want to add, if you're in the Dawson or Lexington area, I will be glad to provide those compost bins for you. Just shoot me an email message on Facebook or my email, keeplexbeautiful@rocketmail.com. Well, I will be glad to get those for you.
Thanks, Elvie. And then we had another question from Ruby asking if the worm bin outside, if it attracts flies. If you keep your worm bin outside, it shouldn't attract flies as long as it's properly maintained. Since you would have the worms eating it, the flies also would not be able to get into the bin very easily. And the smell and everything should stay down as long as you're not overfeeding the worms or not feeding them something that they don't like. And then Brianna said that she has a chicken coop and can she add chicken waste to the compost? I would stay away from adding animal waste to your compost, depending on what kind of compost what kind of compost you have. If you have a compost pile, possibly, but if you have a smaller composting situation, then I would say don't add any animal waste. For the Ruby asked again if flies do collect, is there a safe way to get rid of them? So I would just say I'm not sure if there would be a super safe way to get rid of them, other than just not feeding the compost pile for about a week, and then the worms should be able to eat through that, and the flies should pretty much go away at that point. But I haven't had any problems with my worm bin, and I've had it inside and outside with flies being attracted, really. As long as you give the worms enough food for them to eat and not too much, it doesn't really put off a smell that would attract the flies. Okay, so coffee grounds. Yes, coffee grounds are a good green to put into your compost, especially if you drink a lot of coffee. You don't want those going to waste. And you can also use coffee grounds just themselves and mix it in with your soil if you have like an excessive amount of them for gardening. All right, so I will go ahead and start with the compost bucket. So for the composting bucket, all you need would be a 5-gallon bucket like this one. And what you do before you start the bucket is you will have to drill holes at the bottom, and you can either drill them or use an ice picker or screwdriver. Those are just for drainage and aeration. So on the bottom of this bucket, I have about 5 holes drilled into it. Smaller, you can do larger holes, but not too big to where like pieces of soil and your scraps are coming out. It's just for drainage and for air to get in to the bucket. So right now I have just soil in the bucket. So that's one of the things that we're going to use is soil, but not potting soil. What you want to use for soil for your bucket would be topsoil or other compost. So we have the soil in there, and then you will need to add greens and browns. So browns would be things like twigs or branches, dead leaves, things like that. So right now I just have some dry leaves that I'm going to put in there, and I do about 1-to-1 ratio of greens, browns, and soil. So I just put the browns in there, and then greens would be your veggie scraps, grass clippings, vegetable waste, and food, the coffee grounds or eggshells. So I just have some apples here that I will put in there, and you just kind of layer these, and then the last thing you will need will be water. So for water, having the right amount of water in your composting bucket is important for the development of the compost. So I did about a 1-to-1 ratio of the greens, browns, and soil, and then I'm gonna do about half a cup of water in there, and your bucket should be filled up about halfway when you start it. And then, so I've got all my ingredients in there. This is actually pretty quick and easy. But as I said, I put apples in there, and other things that you can put in there for your greens would be coffee grounds, and you can, if you have compostable filters or tea bags, you want to make sure there's no plastic in the tea bags that you're using, nutshells, shredded paper, cardboard and paper, yard trimmings, grass trimmings, houseplants, maybe some houseplants that have been affected badly and you need to be composted. You can use leaves, hay, and straw for your browns, and that also can be cotton and wool. And then you can use your dryer and vacuum cleaner lint as a brown. And yeah. So once you've added all your stuff to your bucket, you're gonna need a lid for your bucket, and you just put the lid on there securely, and then you just shake it up, and you can turn it around and stuff. Just make sure it's all mixed around, so there's no like just parts of soil or just parts of greens or just parts of browns. And then you're going to want to put the bucket in a sunny area outside, and it kind of will take about 2 months to get good compost. Again, that depends on what you're adding to it, and also what the temperature is outside. So paper and cardboard is considered a brown because it will absorb some of those liquids given off by the grains. And then Lisa asked, are eggshells okay to use with vermicomposting? Was concerned about the sharp edges harming the worms. So eggshells typically aren't used with vermicomposting. I'm not quite sure if you can use them. I'm not sure about that question. The sharp edges, I'm not sure is the thing about harming the worms. But I'm not quite sure that they're suggested for using for that. And yes, I did put the lid on the bucket. So after you're done filling all your bucket up and you'll have it about halfway full, you'll put the lid on and you'll mix it up. and then you put it outside in a sunny spot, and then you're gonna, about once a week, gonna want to turn it and shake it up again, just to keep the heat moving around. And then Deborah asked, do you continue to add more to the bucket, or is it just one time? You can continue to add for about a month is what I've seen, and then you're gonna want to let it kind of just stew in there. And if you you'll want to check on it and make sure it's not too wet or too dry. So like if it is too wet, you will put more browns in it, or soil to soak up some of the liquid that hasn't been draining out. And you can also drain excess liquid if there's a lot. And if it's too dry, you're going to want to add a little bit more water and maybe a couple more greens and mix it in there again. And then there's going to be like about a month where you don't really add anything. You're monitoring it. And it'll continue to decompose into the compost. And then that's when you can kind of start another bucket. And then once the compost is ready from the first bucket, you can use that compost on your garden and your houseplants and stuff like that. And then you can keep reusing the bucket and kind of just cycling through them. And then Jessica said you can dry eggshells in the oven and add them directly to plants like peppers, and that will help with their growth. There are holes just in the bottom of the bucket, not in the lid, because having them in the lid could make it dry out a little too quickly. So it's just in the bottom for drainage and aeration, and then you'll be turning it every week. And then someone said that they think that eggshells in small quantities are okay with worms. It's more of a refuge for the worm digestion, so it is okay. It's a little bit of grit for them to have. How often do you stir or shake the bucket? About once a week is what I found works the best. Yeah, and thank you all for coming today. And I hope you guys all start composting at home and reducing your food waste. Just another reminder about the survey that will be linked at the end. Please take the survey, and it helps us with our programming and also with seeing how you like the webinar. Also, thank you to LV with Keep Lexington Beautiful for coming and sharing the information about food waste today.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you everyone for joining us today.